Mr. Nelson, do I have your consent?
Sure.
It feels so weird calling you Mr. Nelson because I had this friend and his dad was one of those dads where no matter what season it was, you'd come over and he's sitting on the
Yeah.
couch in his underwear all year round.
I should
Although,
do that. I should have done this interview in my underwear. That would have been awesome. And not
so
even address it. Don't even fucking address it. Just
yeah.
sit here in my underwear.
All right, guys, I have a very special treat for you. I would like to welcome to the channel Academy Award winner, special effects makeup artist Christopher Nelson. Dude, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Thanks, Chris.
And today we're just going to shoot the shit a little, just talk special effects, your career, because you have had a very eventful career in front and behind the camera. But you and I have actually worked on a production together, not directly, but on the same production.
Which was,
Thor: Love and
let me
Thunder.
guess, Thor, Love, and Thunder. Okay.
So,
I didn't know you worked on that.
yes, sir. So I was at Odd Studio at Marrickville. You were working at Fox with Adam Johansson, Emily,
Yeah.
Damien, I think Gavin. So obviously they were running back and forth from the studio to Fox, but I was back at the shop in Marrickville working on some 3D printed pieces and stuff like that.
Oh.
But yeah, you were just solely in charge of Nebula.
Yes, because I had worked on the Guardians and I had done Nebula for a couple of the Avenger movies and things like that. So I had done that character for, I don't know, 3 movies or so, 4 movies or so at that point, and then went to do her for the Guardians portion of Love and Thunder. And that was in January of, it was a 21. We were in the pandemic still,
Yes. Yeah.
thick into the pandemic, and I remember I had to fly to Australia, which is my favorite country in the world, by the way. I've traveled the world doing
I
what I
paid him
do
to
for a
say that,
living.
everyone.
I've honestly, I've traveled the world. I've been lucky enough to travel the world in my career, and I got to tell you, Australia is my favorite country. I've been there 4 times, I think, and I love it there. But yeah, I had to travel there and go into quarantine for 14 days in a hotel room, which I wasn't allowed to. This was for Love and Thunder. I wasn't allowed to leave the room, and had to. I was locked in there. They had a guard outside in the hallway, and they would deliver my food 3 times a day. And it was a beautiful. It was January, so it was summer in Australia, so it was beautiful outside. So I was looking out the window at the beautiful, Sydney summer,
Mm.
and just sitting there wishing that I could be outside. 14 days is a long time to be cooped up in a hotel room, let me tell you.
Oh,
But
dude, 100%. I remember I didn't even think realize you were coming over here until I was at the shop and a mate of mine sent me your story that you were in quarantine in Sydney. And I'm like,
mhm.
no way, they flew him over here. Like, that's pretty special to obviously be like, Chris is the guy that knows Nebula, knows the makeup, because I'm assuming it's
Mhm.
a very involved makeup when you've got
Yes,
so many
very.
elements, especially with chroming elements. Because was that silicon or foam latex?
All silicone, all
Wow.
silicone
Okay.
makeup. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
That's a whole different beast in itself, painting silicon.
yeah. That's probably one of the most intricate, toughest makeups I've ever done, and that's why back on Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I got a call. Do you want to work on Guardians 2? And I said, yeah, but only if I could do Nebula, because I love that makeup. It was beautiful, from the first movie, and I love that character. And they were like, oh, it just so happens that's the makeup that we want you to do. So
Yeah.
it's a really intricate, difficult makeup, very challenging, both applying and also paint wise. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. It's a great makeup and great design. So
It is.
yeah,
It's crazy how much it changes. What's the actress's name? Karen.
Gillian.
Yeah, Karen. It changes her face so much. And I think obviously the
Yeah,
contacts help because those are the big cupping contacts, I think. But
yeah.
yeah, and it's great that they got you back, and it's cool that you were here as well because it was a big deal for us because we had a big drought. Like back in the day, we had like the Star Wars prequels, the Matrix here for a bit, and then there was nothing, and now Love and Thunder came back. We had Furiosa,
Hmm.
Fall Guy, and all that. That was my big first kind of effects thing to do with a studio like that, and just to be, and I assume you've had the same, to be surrounded by talent, and people don't realize it takes a village of people to do
Oh
all
yeah.
this. It's not one guy with an apron on in a workshop. It's amazing, like, the hair punchers, the silicon painters, the mold makers, and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And it was
Yeah.
amazing to see, because Odd also built the boost scans, the giant owls, for Love and
Hmm.
Thunder, and as well as they worked on, and I got to help a little bit with Bale's gore prosthetics, which was
Mm.
fun.
Mm.
But just little things like the tattoos that Bale had, like scarification similar to Drax, how you would map that out on a head that has obviously curvature. If you lay that
Yeah.
flat, how does that look? It's an engineering process. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes into these characters that sometimes are seen briefly and sometimes they're featured, but there's so many people, that's why I'm always a little leery about, when people see these movies and they critique them and they judge them and they have their opinions on them. It's always funny to me because people don't really realize how much work goes into these movies and how many artisans are involved and how many people, and everything is so specialized, and people who make a living out of doing one little particular thing, on these movies and on these characters. And like I said, sometimes they're featured, sometimes they're not, but the same amount of work goes into every character for these movies, and and it's great fun, and I hope people, and I think they do, maybe even it's subconsciously, they appreciate, the work that goes into it, the practicality that goes into it, which is difficult on a Marvel film and stuff because there's so much visual effects going on in it. They don't realize that there is a tremendous amount of practical effects that go into it too. They're just sometimes augmented, that's awesome that you got to work on it and put your artwork stamp on it. I mean, it's like I said, so many people, and that's awesome that you're one of them. That's
It was
super cool. I didn't
it
know
was
that.
good, man. Yeah. Even though my guy got digitized, I kind of knew that though. It was the Dark Shadow Lord at the beginning, that originally wielded the Necro sword that Bale gets. It was just a giant 3D printed dead body of this god that essentially looked like an oil slick. Like that's how they painted
Mm-hmm.
him. But he was
Mm-hmm.
just 3D printed, like big chunky pieces, put him together. And it was 2 weeks of like patching, seaming, all that stuff, and then prime him and
Right.
hand him off. And Damien painted him all by hand to look iridescent.
Right.
And I had a feeling, I think they just wanted something tangible for Bale to work with, like just have a physical thing there. But they went in and cleaned it all up, and it looked like 1,000 times better than what I did because there were chunky print lines. Colin Ware, the head sculptor, he's like, what we're going to do is get tissue paper and PVC and stipple it over, and it will look like dead skin. And while it's drying, you
Mm.
can maneuver it to do interesting things, like when someone dies, the skin thins and gravity
Mm-hmm. Sure.
kicks in. So it hid them. But yeah, he looked like pristine on screen. And I think if you go into the notion of the plan is there is no plan, you'll have a good time.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
now going all the way back to little tiny kid Chris Nelson. Was there
Yeah.
something that you saw on TV or in a movie, and straight away that made you go, "Yep, I want to be a makeup artist," or like work in the film industry, or was it like a
Mm.
gradual thing for you?
No, there was a couple moments. I've been lucky enough to have a lot of really pivotal moments in my life and my career, even from a little kid. I think my very first moment that I knew that I wanted to work in movies was Night of the Living Dead.
Mm.
Uh, I grew up in Pittsburgh, where George Romero was from, and where that movie was shot. And every summer they would show Night of the Living Dead on Chiller Theater. There was a television show called Chiller Theater. Oddly enough, Fangoria magazine just recently did an article about it. Night of the Living Dead was one of the first movies where I was like, "What is that? And what is going on? And this is horrifying, and this is awesome, and this is great, and I love it, and I want to be involved. What is this, and how can I get into it, and I was very young. I think I was maybe 6 years old, 7 years old,
Hmm.
watching Night of the Living Dead. And so Night of the Living Dead, a lot of Universal horror films after school, when I would come home after school, the obviously the original Frankenstein and the Creature of the Black Lagoon and things like that. I was just like, I knew in my head as a kid that there's that blurred line of fantasy and reality, and I knew that somebody had to have made that. It exists somewhere. So who is that person, and how do I get that job? um those movies were the ones that really did it for me. Jaws was a huge one. That was in 1975, and I saw it in the theater. I was 7 years old when that movie came out, and scared the shit out of me, and I loved it. I just loved the magic of Hollywood. It wasn't so much, I mean, yes, it was the makeup effects and makeup and monsters and things like that. That's what I gravitated towards, but it was just the movie magic, just the magic of filmmaking and telling stories and losing yourself for 2 hours. Or at that time it was an hour and a half. Now it's 2 to 3 hours. But I just love the magic of movies, and I still believe in it to this day. And I think that's what it was. I was a little kid when I started. Movies have been my church ever since I was a little kid. That's been the movies have been my parents. They've been my grandparents. They've been my church. They've been my everything. And I love film in all its aspects, not just horror. I just love film altogether. If you ask me what my top five movies are, more than likely, maybe one or two of them are horror films.
Hmm.
I just love film altogether. Does that answer your question? I don't know if it
That
does.
was, you just went above and beyond for that. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, I love it. I love it. It's you summarize it the way I see like LA. Like I get LA isn't for everyone, but when I'm there, I love the atmosphere. I love,
Yeah,
like you said, the history, peeking behind the curtain of
yeah,
how things are made. When you go to Hollywood Boulevard, they've got the museum there of not just creature effects, but like a dress, a suit from an old 60s show, and
yeah,
it's there, and you're like, that's it. Like that's amazing. It's right in front of me. Even when you either see or hear of prop makers, special effects artists, just production in general, using the cheapest stuff to make something that goes on to be so iconic. And at the time,
hmm,
they don't know what they're doing. They just got to kit bash something together.
yeah,
And it ends up becoming so iconic. And then, even case in point, one day I was there, and I was bored one day before a con, a few days before a con, killing time, got in a hire car and just drove to Ironhead Studios, inconspicuous, out in I forget what area it's in, but it's just the industrial area, no insignia, looks like a factory you'd see down the road here. They open the
hmm,
door and it's just like Wonderland.
yeah,
Um, I love that type of stuff. And
yeah.
I think also because for me, movies were my comfort thing, and they still are to this day, but the escapism. And then also when you get to do that and be amongst it, you kind of
Mhm.
like give yourself a pat on the back and you're like, we're here. This is great.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be involved with, and I've said it before, I'm super lucky. I had a moment, this might be off train of thought, but I
Mhm.
had a moment not too long ago, maybe, what was it, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I can't remember. But when I was a kid, my parents were divorced, and I lived with my father on the East Coast, and my mother lived here in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
Every summer I would come to visit my mother. I spent the summer in Los Angeles. The only thing I ever wanted to do was go to Universal Studios. That's the only thing I ever wanted to do. Go to Universal Studios, go on the tram, see the Jaws shark, see the special effects show, see the collapsing bridge. I was just Universal Studios was the pinnacle of magic to me.
Mm.
And I remember being incredibly young and being on the Universal Studios lot and going, someday I'm going to work here. Someday I'm going to work here and I'm going to work on movie magic. And cut to years and years later, and this was about a year ago or so. I was working on a limited series called Gaslit with
Mhm.
Sean Penn and Julie Roberts. I was doing Sean Penn's makeup for that, and and I was walking. It was early in the morning. It was like 5 in the morning. It was still dark, and my call time was really early. And I'm walking across the Universal lot where I used to go as a kid on the tram ride, saying that I'm going to work here someday. And I looked over, and there was a poster of Halloween Ends on the side of the, with my mask,
Yeah.
on the side of the soundstage, advertising Halloween Ends as I'm about to go do Sean Penn's makeup, as I'm on the Universal lot, as I'm on, it was just this full circle moment of
Mm.
just joy. You know what I mean? just like,
Yeah.
holy shit, this is one of those moments that you have to take in and remember, and realize that this is the reason why all the hardship that you went through, this is it, this is the payoff. It's not the money, it's not the
Mm.
credit, it's not the any of that stuff. This is it, this is that moment. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, it's still dark, and I'm looking at all that stuff, about to go do what I'm about to go do. So working in this business, I've been so lucky and fortunate, and it's been great. It's been great. And Halloween has been good to me. I know a lot of people want to talk about Halloween a lot,
Yeah.
even though I've done so much more in my career and I've
Mm.
done so much other stuff. Halloween seems to be the thing that people want to talk about. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, I love hearing. I got goosebumps when you said you saw the Halloween Ends poster, and it doesn't matter how early it is, how tired you are, you just
Yeah,
like, you did it, kid. Like I
yeah.
love that. So when the wheels were set in motion, during your early years, what was your process like in terms of perfecting the craft? Like, were you self-taught? Did you start with like the old school monster mask, I like wet clay, gypsum molds, latex mask? Did you go
Mhm.
to school? What was your process like?
It was all self-taught. I didn't go to school. I couldn't afford to go to school. I was very poor, so I couldn't afford to go to school. It was all self-taught based on books, the old Dick Smith books, and
Mm-hmm.
Corsican books and things like that, and Tom Savini's Grand Illusions, and that kind of stuff. It was all old school stuff. It was all ultracal, hydrocal, experimenting with stuff under the kitchen cabinet, experimenting with fruit, experimenting with oatmeal, anything I can get my hands on. It was crazy. Just trial and error, failing a lot,
Mm.
and it was all self-taught. But at that time, there was no internet, and there was no schools, and there was no, I mean, there was one school. I think there was the Joe Blasco School of Makeup. But again, I couldn't afford to go there. It was about community. It was about kind of, nowadays you have the internet, and we could reach across the sea and talk to each other and communicate with each other and share skills and share ideas, and share all this stuff. At that time, there wasn't any of that stuff. And you had to write to people, and you had to meet people that were of your ilk. I was a misfit kid that loved heavy metal and monsters, and would sit in my room, and when it was very unpopular. Now it's so popular to love monsters and movies and things like that. It wasn't popular back then. It wasn't cool to like that stuff. You were an odd person to like that
Mm.
stuff. I don't think people can really fathom what it was like to be into the horror world back in that time, uh, because it wasn't cool, man. There was no Hot Topic. There was no monster t-shirts. There was no fright rags. There were none of that stuff existed.
Yeah.
And so you developed, and that's why the horror community is such a tight community, because it's always been that way. Back before you had the internet and all the community that you have now, it was even tighter community, because there was only maybe one other person in the city that was 20 miles away from you that was into horror, that you were in communication with. And so learning makeup effects at that time was difficult, and you had to meet people from Ohio or meet people from other states, and correspond via letters and stuff. I sound like an old man. Jesus Christ.
And that's how it
Uh,
was.
I'm not that old, but but you know what I mean? Like that goes to the topic of the horror community and why we're so tight, because it's how it was. The conception of the horror community is because we're a small community and we're all very passionate about what we do, and
Mhm.
it's very specific, and we're all misfits on the island of misfit toys, and we love each other and we support each other, and so that was my introduction. Going back to your topic, that was my introduction to makeup effects and learning. Learning was all about communication between other artists, and you learned what they were doing, and they would give you a tip, and you'd give them a tip, and you would just learn, and you would meet people that were in your community. And so that's how I learned. That's and I still do that to this day,
I
learn.
remember I think you were chatting with the Slaughtered Lamb boys, Frank and Darren. And one thing that really was refreshing to hear you say is I still reach out to colleagues if I'm stuck in a pinch.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something,
Yeah.
and I think that's so good and healthy as an artist,
Mm-hmm.
not, being stubborn and saying I can do this myself. It's okay to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get where you're coming from, because I was that next generation where YouTube wasn't really a thing. It was like a couple of, I think there was like 3 videos on there, but I was on the old Night Owl forum from Justin Mabry, and it was pretty much just photos, or if not, just a description of how to do something. Mark Alfrey, is it Mark Alfrey?
Mm-hmm.
Who did this giant creature from the Black Lagoon, and he had a sculpting tutorial on VHS, like Savini and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
also going back to you saying failing a lot, I think failing is very healthy. And sometimes I'll do a project and I haven't stuffed anything up, and I'm like, damn, kind of wanted to. What happened? Or you kind of like,
Yeah.
what's the catch? Something's bound to happen. But I think
Yeah.
if you're not failing sometimes, then you're not learning.
Yeah.
And obviously, this stuff isn't cheap. You go through a lot of
Yeah.
materials that sometimes don't
Yeah.
work out. But it's
Yeah.
okay. It's all part of the process. But I love hearing that you still reach out to colleagues.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I still talk to anybody and everybody. Like there are people in the business that are very competitive,
Mm.
and it's about status.
Mhm.
I'm just not built that way. I'm a collaborative artist. I love collaboration, maybe to make up for my shortcomings, but I think that's okay. I'm just I like collaborating. I just think it's fun,
Yeah.
and again, it's a community, and I love that. Like I love that I can call. I remember I was on Suicide Squad, and I was having a really difficult time with some things, and I called Rick Baker. I was able to call Rick Baker and go, Rick, I need some advice here, man. I need some direction, and he gave me direction, and I took it, and it was great. And I'm so glad that I did. I could have just tried to do it myself and stuck to my guns and, to take my own advice. But sometimes there's always someone better than you, and there's always someone that has more knowledge and education and experience,
Mm.
and why not benefit off the experience that somebody else has? Why not? It's only going to benefit you, and respect them, and in the long run be the way to go. So I love reaching out to other people. I think it's great. And I love that we can do this, here, and
Yeah.
people can do it on YouTube. You know what I mean? I get people every day reaching out to me about the rehaul thing, which has been a thing ever since I did Halloween.
Well, actually, just
Which
to, I'm going to come
is
clean. This whole interview is a ruse. Sir, will you rehaul my Tots mask?
right. You and
Um,
you and 1,000 other people.
oh man, and because I met you in 2017 at Monster Palooza, and
Okay.
this is I was dating a fellow colleague of yours, Jennifer Lynn Warren from American Horror Story. And
Yeah,
Jen and
yeah,
I are
yeah.
still great friends to this day. She's one of my dearest friends. And we went to Monster Palooza, and I think this was just after the Oscars, and you were just walking around, happy go lucky, just tats, everything. I'm like, that guy doesn't have an Oscar. And Jen's like, yeah, he does. And he did my makeup for American Horror Story. I'm like, that dude. I'm like, he's a dude. Like, he's a guy. Like, just I don't know. Like I expect like someone who's won an Oscar to be walking around Monsterpalooza with a tux and I don't
Right.
know, but you were you were very sweet to me and you took the time and I showed you my Captain Boomerang cosplay because I just
Hmm.
did a shoot in Sydney before I came over as
Hmm.
Captain Boomerang. I was really proud of it. But you took the time and I could just tell you were invested, even though it was like a couple of minutes. And obviously you were quickly catching up with Jen. But yeah, you were just so humble, man. And it's so cool just to see how unaffected you are, given like, I don't think people really realize your resume because I was doing my research on IMDb. Was your first film Batman Returns?
It was one of the first. It was the first big one.
Okay.
It wasn't my first film. Wasn't my first film, no. But it was like the first big film
Yep.
that I worked on.
Were you what were you
It was
a like
amazing.
shop assistant or what were you?
I worked for two companies on Batman Returns. I worked for a company called Optic Nerve.
Hmm.
And this was when it was owned by Everett Burrell and John Vulich. John Vulich has passed away, but we did mechanical bats. They were about this big, and
Yep.
we made all these mechanical bats that with a wire system that plugged into people. When a couple people got attacked by the bats, we made all these. I remember making all these little tiny mechanical bats. And then I worked for Stan Winston, working on the penguins and puppeteering the penguins, all the penguins in Gotham Park. When they have the rockets on the back, and also in the Penguin Lair.
Hmm.
When Chris Walken's down there and everything, and we had real penguins along with fake penguins, and they were all puppets with cables and things like that. So those are that was those were the two things that I did for Batman Returns, and it was amazing. It was at a time when I walked on the Universal lot and went into the soundstage, and Gotham City was built there.
Oh.
You were standing in Gotham City.
Mm,
Wasn't green screen. There was no green screen. There was no VFX, none of that stuff. It was built there.
mm,
City blocks of Gotham City, paved roads with crosswalks and skyscrapers that went in. Obviously they cut off when it hit the ceiling, but skyscrapers that were built in forced perspective to look like they were going a lot higher than they were, and the Batmobile pulling in down the street, and Michael Keaton getting out in his costume, and Danny DeVito in his makeup, and we had all these penguins, and we had I mean it was all there in front of you, and it was talk about magic, talk
mm.
about magical. You're just standing there going, this is the epitome of movie magic. It was just amazing. And so I was so lucky to be involved in that. And funny enough, we used to sit there for weeks waiting to puppeteer penguins. We knew, like, the AD would come out and he'd say, well, we're not going to get to this for another couple hours. And so we're like, okay. So we would walk up to the Universal lot and go on the ET ride and go on the go on all the rides because we could get in free. We were already on the lot, so we could get in free. So we would constantly be going on the ET rides and going on the tram and going on all the rides to Universal, then come back, puppeteer some penguins for a couple hours, and then they cut, and have to reset up. So we'd go back on the ET ride and stuff. It was a wonderful time. I think that was 1991. I think it
Yeah, that
was.
sounds right. Yeah, because
Yeah.
Returns came out in 92 and like
92. Yeah.
Winston was him and his crew, like you included, were had some bangers around that time, like Predator, T2,
Mm-hmm.
Scissorhands, Batman,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like with the inclusion of V Neil, it was
Mm-hmm.
just I don't just that little pocket there just had
Yeah.
such memorable makeups. Like obviously Johnny Depp's Edward Scissorhands makeup was subtle but effective, and like the
Yeah.
fascination of how they engineered the scissor hands and I love all that stuff and the penguins as well. So this next question's a bit involved, not involved, but
Okay.
I've always been fascinated with this topic. So during your career, was there ever a point that going into a show, you and the effects crew knew exactly how to do it as soon as it was pitched? You're like, we got it? Or was there ever a time that you'd sign on for a gig and thought to yourself, I don't know how the hell we're going to do this, but it actually turns out to be your best work, one of your best works, and you learn
Right.
something along the way?
Wow. That's a great question. That's a really great question. It is a complicated question because that can go to something from the past, but also something recent. Uh, I used to work for a guy named Steve Johnson. I don't know
Mm,
if a lot of people are very familiar with him, but I worked for I think 7 years for Steve Johnson. And Steve was a very interesting guy. We never did the same thing the same twice, if
mm,
that makes any sense. We never, for instance, if we were going to cut a guy's head off in a movie, we never did it the same way twice. We always tried to come up with a new way of doing it. He was very encouraging to think outside of the box. That being said, there were many projects we had no idea how we were going to do. We had no clue. But that was the fun of it. That was the
mm.
joy of it. I mean, back in those days though, I mean, look, there was a lot of drinking and drugs involved. Maybe, I
Love it.
don't know, like it was still a rock and roll
Yeah.
occupation, you know what I
Mm,
mean? It wasn't unionized and it wasn't like it is now. It was a very rock and roll occupation, makeup effect. Thinking outside the box was encouraged, and so we would come up with we would do crazy stuff like build giant house-sized fish tanks and build dummies upside down and shoot them underwater upside down in scuba gear, and we would fill plastic bags with methacellulose and shoot those upside down, or you know, we would do the craziest stuff, and had no idea what we were doing.
mm,
No idea what we were doing, but we were just trying to achieve something that hadn't been seen before. So yeah, there's been plenty of times you don't know how you're going to do it. A good example is Halloween. You know, when I got the Halloween gig, I was like, "Oh shit, this is important." You
mhm,
know, after all these years, we have to get this right. I didn't necessarily feel pressure. I just felt, this has got to be right. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If we don't get the mask right, it doesn't work. And I didn't really know how we were going to do that. It's not as, Halloween fans think it's as easy as just copy the mask or just copy it or just get a pull from this, or it doesn't really work that way. There's a
mm.
lot of intricacies and complications involved when it comes to doing something like that. So approach it in a completely fresh new way, but anyway, sorry, I digress.
Oh, no, no, you're right.
Um, what are some things that I've done that I didn't know what I was doing? But I mean, Suicide Squad's a good one.
Mhm.
Suicide Squad, Killer Croc. We went through a lot of different iterations of what that was going to look like, again, you have to go with. There's the studio involved and the executives and the director and the producers and the things, and so you want it to look like this, but this person says it's too scary. It can't be that scary. This person says, no, I don't like that color. This person says, no, I don't like there's so many chefs in the kitchen
Mhm.
that you have to juggle, that you have to deal with. And again, I always equate it to a stew where you're going, I can give you my design, or I can give you what I think it should be, and I make this stew, and it's got lamb and it's got carrots and potatoes and broth, and it tastes wonderful and it's great. And you taste it and you say you love it, but you want me to remake it, but you want me to remake it with a football helmet and cottage cheese and a burnt tire, and you give me all these bad ingredients and all these bad ideas, and I still have to make it taste good. You know what I mean? So does that make sense?
100%. Yeah.
So
I think also, you got to compromise sometimes, even though it's against what you believe is right,
absolutely.
because it's subjective. It's so subjective. One person wants it this way, and you're like, no, 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 you trust me on this one. And I can only imagine what that was like with Killer Croc, because that's an involved makeup.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
a big one as well.
Yeah, I wanted it to be a lot different, but they were afraid it was going to be too scary, and they didn't want it to be scary. Which, you know, you gotta, I mean, there's only so much you can do. So, they didn't want it to be too grotesque. They didn't want it to be too this. There's a lot of, again, chefs in the kitchen that you have to juggle. But I think that the trick to being a good artist in this business is to be able to juggle art and commerce. That's the trick. You have to be able to take a bunch of bad ingredients and a bunch of bad ideas, and if you can still make it taste good, and you could still sell it to people, and it still works within the context of the story that you're telling, then you've achieved something. Halloween again is a good example. Look, I know the mask wasn't what everybody wanted, and I know what it should have been. I'm proud of what we did, and I think it's a good mask. I'm proud of it. But look, I could have taken the original 78 mask and it's the way that it looks now and done that, but it doesn't work. It doesn't really work with the story that you're telling and the look. It just wouldn't have worked. Trust me, it wouldn't have worked. It would have been laughable. You would
Yes.
have sat there and went, what am I looking at? And even if I'd have done that, Halloween fans wouldn't have liked it. I guarantee you wouldn't have liked it, because it just doesn't work. There's a silhouette and there's a look to it that it needed to be. And so again, you're trying to find that middle ground of art and commerce.
Yes, I agree. And perfect segue. Suppose we better touch on Halloween for a bit. But
Yeah.
you are right in regards to the mask and suspending that disbelief of, trust me, we have to go a separate route. I've seen two particular artists that have recreated the mask how it looks today, the 78 mask. Looks
Yeah.
fantastic, looks
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And I've seen people wear it. It looks good, but you're right. It may in certain shots come off as hokey and maybe a bit goofy,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the way the lip has folded in, and it's that kind of, when people get Myers masks and they suck the lips in, it looks like a grandma, like
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff like that. So I think because it was yourself, Vincent Van Dyke, and Justin Mabry.
No,
No.
myself. Well, it was all different. On the first one, it was me and Vince. On the second one, it was me, Vince, and Daniel Trinanzi.
Mhm.
And as well as on the third one. The third one was, yeah, me, Vince, and Daniel Trinanzi. Justin Mabry worked on the first on 2018. He did a 78 version
Yep.
of the mask, because at that time there was a 78 flashback in 2018
Hmm.
in the script. And we did that version. Justin did a great job. Justin's amazing. I love Justin to death. It wasn't quite right. I was about to have him redo it, or have us redo it, when they cut the 78 flashback stuff from 2018. So we never ended up using that mask. We never shot it, never used it. It wasn't quite right. We rushed it. And I wasn't happy with it.
And that's the thing. If you go into it, like I was saying before, the plan is there is no plan, knowing that it's not going to please everyone. But for the most part, I think the biggest draw card of that trilogy are the masks and the story each mask tells, and the continuity that yourself
Mm-hmm.
and the crew of artisans maintain, I think is very special, especially when, it's amazing how the 2018 mask shifts. Like the one take shot where he goes into the house, kills the
Mm-hmm.
the the mum and all stuff like that. I got Halloween 2 vibes, like Dick Warlock vibes with how it was stretched
Mm-hmm.
there. And then there
Mm-hmm.
are other times where it gave me sort of castle vibes. So I feel like even though Halloween 2 81 is removed from that timeline, it's subtly appealing to people who maybe like the castle stretch or the Warlock wide, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. But also just you can tell there is a lot of care. And
Mm-hmm.
it may not be for everyone, but I think those masks are so special within that trilogy, and they're just great to look at. Like I would have gladly hopped on a plane to go over to when you were doing a con, because it's great that you take these masks out to cons, let fans see them up close. There's some prop collectors that are just hide them away in storage, never to see the light of day ever again. I think,
Hmm.
we're a tight community, sharing is caring. And for you to do that and be like, yeah, man, go have a look. Do you want a photo with it? Let's get a photo together. I think it's
Yeah.
great. And I remember seeing the behind the scenes photos, like you touched on, with the clean mask. And there was a photo of a lady hairing one of the clean masks, and everyone's like,
Hmm.
oh, what's the story with that? And then, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys did, was it Silicon Masters? Was that for archival use?
We did do silicone masters, only we did a silicone master so we can mold them and have another master mold. We have a silicone master. We have the plaster molds that we pour the actual latex mass out of.
Hmm.
When we did a sculpture, we molded it in silicone, in a silicone matrix mold,
Yep.
and we poured one up in silicone as a master to have in case anything were to ever happen to the molds. We have this silicone master that we can remold. So it was more archival, than it was anything. So we were just wanted to make sure that we had our bases covered. Once it was approved, we have that, and we could always go back to it in case we ever revisit this. So
I'm
yeah.
assuming with the Silicon Masters, they were squishy, so you could do the plaster master and
Yeah.
pull out the
Yeah.
the Silicon
Yeah.
Master. Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Also, when you do silicone, it doesn't shrink. We're,
Mm.
we're trying to avoid shrinkage and things like that. Because every time you do a mold, you lose, the detail, and it shrinks a little, and thing there. There's how it is. There's all those things you have to take into consideration when it comes to those masks. But um, I'm proud of those masks. I think they're good. I think they've become iconic, if you ask me. I think they've become, when you think of the original and then you think of ours, I think if you're going to like something, that's what I think. And I'm happy with them, and I think they're great. I think it's funny. People think there are so many different versions of it. Going back to when you said the mask looks different in the 2018, I did that on purpose.
Ah.
I did that. I did all that on purpose. What I was trying to emulate was in the original film, the original Halloween, the mask looked different every time you saw it almost,
Hmm.
and it was sometimes Castle had it on his chin, sometimes he had it tucked under his chin. Sometimes it was lit this way, sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes his hair was longer, sometimes he got a haircut and it was short. It was different all the time. And that's something that I really loved about it, and that I talked to David about. I was like, let's make it look different all the time, and so I had strips of foam inside the mask that I would change,
Hmm.
so it would set different on his face all the time. I would pick and choose what scene to make it look a little different in, and it's as simple as you put two strips of foam inside the mask. Well, it pads it, right? Well, you take those out, then it's going to set differently. If I take the one on the top out, it's going to set differently. If I take the forehead one out, I had all these little strips of foam that I would just puzzle piece inside the mask to do that on purpose. I wanted it to look different all the time. That's why people think there's so many different masks in that movie. They're like, well, there's the closet mask, and there's the one take mask, and there's this mask. It's like, no, there's not. No, there isn't. It's all the same mask for the most part. It's just I was fucking with you.
I love that. I just picture some sweaty Halloween nose being like, no, it's the Castle Stretch mask. And then it pans to you, and you're
Yeah.
just like, no, just no.
No, no. I've had people send me pictures of the mask, going, this mask, which mask is this and which mask is that? And I'm like, you're all getting it wrong. Like, for the most part, everyone gets it wrong. And I only made on 2018, I didn't make very many masks. I made more masks in the subsequent sequels for different reasons. But 2018, there weren't a lot of masks made for that movie. I think I made three.
You're right.
I think I made three masks for 2018 because we didn't have the money, and it was only Jim and maybe one stunt guy, and the masks change. They change the more you wear them. They're like a baseball mitt. They loosen up, they get sweat, they get dirt, they loosen up, then you dry them, and I had to disinfect them every night. So I would spray a combination of vodka and water spritzer inside the mask to disinfect them, and then you dry it. And well, then that's going to shrink the latex a little bit. And then he puts it on and stretches it, and then he sweats, and then it stretches out a little bit. It's different all the time. It changes, and that's what I love about it, is that it's different all the time, and that's what I wanted it to be. Yeah,
That's great. You got to keep people guessing. And
you do.
leading into Halloween Kills, I did a video on it when the photos came out of Tom Jones Jr. as
Mm.
Loomis. And I was like, oh my God, this is great deep fake. This is amazing. Lo and behold, you have made physical silicone prosthetics on a guy that was, correct me if I'm wrong, a construction foreman or head of
Yeah,
construction on the production. What
yeah.
was that process like? Because it's a very subtle makeup.
Mm.
It's crazy how little bits here and there can just shift someone's facial features. But it seems like Tom Jones Jr. was like that perfect blank canvas. Was it a last minute decision where you guys were like, he looks good, get him?
It was for David. David was the one David was the one that picked him out. I mean, it was, I think we were having a production meeting or something. I can't quite remember how it went down exactly, but we were having a production meeting with all the department heads. And yeah, he was the construction foreman for the
Right.
in North Carolina, Wilmington. And he was sitting across the table, and Loomis came up, and David's staring at him, apparently going, "That guy looks a lot like fucking Loomis." And he goes, "Let's just get that guy." But that's the way David is. David will be
Yeah.
like, "That's how I ended up in the movie." David goes, "Let's just you do it," like he's just that guy. So he points at Tom and he goes, "He looks exactly like Loomis. Let's just get him." And Tom's like, "What? Okay, sure, why not?" And then we weren't going to do any makeup on him. David kind of wanted him just the way he was, but I convinced David that we could push it further and do, if we did a really cool likeness makeup on him, we could really drive it home. I mean, it would have worked. I think it would have worked without the makeup, maybe not quite as well, definitely. But my biggest concern was, doing the makeup, and does it look less like Loomis?
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
want to make him look less like Donald Pleasance, but David was cool and was like, "All right, if you think you could do it, then let's do it." And so we did a sculpture. We had Tom Jones flown out to Los Angeles, and we did a life cast on him, and 3D printed him, and did a sculpture. And it was crazy. We just looked at the sculpture and went, "Oh my God, it's Donald Pleasance. Oh my God." And that sold David. And so David was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we made all the pieces. It's actually quite an elaborate makeup. It's like a 12 piece makeup.
You're right. Okay.
He's got ears,
Mhm.
he's got nose, he's got temples, he's got a whole top of the head, he's got upper lids, lower lids, he's got a lot of stuff on him. Beard, hair pieces, a full wig. I mean, it's quite a makeup. It's
Mm.
actually not as minimal as you think it is. Um, and we did a test makeup, and we were just like, "Oh my God," we all got the chills. It was so amazing just to see Donald Pleasance on set
I
again.
think that flashback scene is such a little gem of a scene, not only because of the makeup, the
Yeah.
flashback look of Michael and Aaron Armstrong doing some, different stuff that wasn't exactly how James Courtney is. I like that there's a difference.
Yeah.
Obviously, because James is a lot older than Aaron, and it's good to have that continuity of you get older, posture changes and stuff like that, but also the filmmaking aspect, how it's kind of got that foggy blue look to it that 78 did have.
Mhm.
I would like to talk about your acting career because you're a damn good performer. I
Oh
um
God.
I was showing Chloe this morning because I've saved the clips that'll overlay here from Kill Bill 2 and 2018 Halloween.
Yeah.
And you're a natural, man. And it was crazy when I put two and two together that you were Tommy from Kill Bill Volume 2. And then obviously everyone got wind that you were Officer Francis in Halloween 2018, and
Yeah.
obviously, you incorporated your baking skills into the movie, which is just beautiful. But with Kill Bill Volume 2, because you did the effects for Volume 1 and 2, yes?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, but you also acted alongside Uma Thurman and the late, great David Carradine. And like I said, you're a natural. But what was that process like? Was it like Tom Jones Jr. and, Halloween 2018 as Officer Francis? Was it just like,
Mhm.
well, Chris, do you want to do it? Or was it a process with Quentin for him to
Mhm.
choose you as Tommy?
Mhm. No, it was definitely a process. It's certainly Quentin's not the type of guy to just go, hey, why don't you do it? He's
Mm,
not that guy. He's very precise and he's very, that happened in a really weird way. We were flying. I was literally on the plane flying to Beijing where we were shooting the first portion of the film. And House of Blue Leaves and the Snow Garden and some of the other extraneous stuff. And so I was on the plane and I'm reading the script and I came across that scene in the church and I was like, I could play that role. I could do that. I'm like, because at the time I was playing with acting, like, because I love Lon Chaney and I love Lon Chaney Sr. and I love the idea of playing characters and wearing makeup. And I was thinking maybe I could do that. And I was kind of studying acting. I was going to the Beverly Hills Playhouse, studying on my off time, my free time, and thinking I might take a stab at it because I was like, I wasn't getting any younger.
mhm.
I'm like, I've always wanted to do it. I should just try it. I should try it. But anyway, I'm reading it. I go, I'd play that role. So we went to China. We shot for about 4 or 5 months in China. Came back to LA. Had about a 2 to 3 week hiatus. During that time, we were having meetings about all the upcoming effects and things like that. And so I went to, I was in a meeting with Quentin and I said, who's this groom going to be? Because in the script, I get my head blown off. You don't see it. You were supposed to see it, but it ended up changing and you ended up not seeing it. You see the aftermath, but in the script, you see his head get blown off.
Mhm.
So I was like, who is this actor? Because we need to get them in for life cast right away because it shoots in like 3 weeks and we have to, whoever this is, we have to get him. And he goes, I don't know who it's going to be, and I'm having a casting session on Friday for it, and and Greg Nicotero was in the room with us, and Greg goes, "Why don't you hire Chris?" And Quentin goes, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, he's been studying acting, and he's really good, and you should hire him." And Quentin looks at me and he goes, "Huh?" He goes, "You look like you could be the guy." He's like, "You could be the guy," and I go, I'll do it in a second. He goes, well, I can't just give it to you. It's too big of a part. You have to audition. You got to audition for it. And I go, I'd be happy with an audition. I don't give a shit what happens.
Mm.
So he goes, all right, Friday, 3 o'clock. And I go, okay. So, and that was like a Wednesday. And so like I had one day to prepare, and it wasn't much of a stretch. There's not much to the, it's pretty much me, that
Mm.
character, not a very bright guy, but, so I went on Friday and auditioned and I felt good about it. And I remember driving up the 405 freeway afterwards going, you know what? I don't give a shit what happens. I auditioned for Quentin Tarantino, and there's not a lot of people that could say they did that, you know. And so, cut to a couple weeks later, we're on set, and we were shooting Daryl Hannah in the hospital where Uma is comatose, and she bites the tongue off that guy, and the
Mhm.
whole thing where she wakes up from her coma. I'm in the trailer, and I get a call on the radio on my walkie-talkie. Says Quentin wants to see you right away. Bring a gallon of blood. So I ran to set, and I go, what's up? Where do you need the blood? And he goes, I don't need any blood. He says, I saw your audition tape. I just want you to know that. And I was like, I was mortified. I was like, oh God, here we go. And he goes, and you were really good. You were really good. I really liked it. And it's down to 4 people, and you're one of the people. And I was like, holy shit, get the fuck out of here. And so then I left, and then the next day, same thing. Come to set, went to set. He was like, I narrowed it down to about two people, and you're one of the people. I was like, get the fuck out of here. This is crazy. So he's dragging it out. And then another day goes by, and he calls me to set, and I'm like, what's up? And he says, you got the part. And
Uh,
I was like, get out of here. He goes, yeah. So I remember leaving set that day, and I went and had my head cast at K&B because I was working for K&B at the time. And I remember going getting my head cast for at K&B that night because we only had a week until that scene shot. And then a week later, there I am standing on set with Uma Thurman and David Carradine and Sam Jackson and Bo Svensson and everybody, acting,
mm,
and the entire crew looking at me like I'm like they're like because I had been working with these people for 6 months as a
yeah.
makeup effects guy. So they're all looking at me like, what are you doing? You're acting in this now, And Lucy Liu's there, and Michael Madsen's there, and Vivica Fox. Everybody's there, and everyone's staring at me, going, "All right, let's see what you got."
Yeah.
So I was nervous as fuck, and I remember Quentin came up to me and goes, "Don't fuck this up." And then I did my first take or two, and David Carradine came over to me. He goes, "Don't quit your day job." And I was like, "Oh my god, that's brutal." But that was my Kill Bill experience. That's how I ended up in the movie.
Oh,
Yeah,
man, I absolutely love it. I remember when I was in high school and I watched Volume 2, and I remember that scene. I'm like, that guy seems like a real chill bloke. But it just like you said, you were just being you, natural. And also, meeting dad for the first time, those nerves. So the nerves probably from filming with all this talent probably helped with
yeah,
that. Because in December, because you worked on Rebel Moon, is that correct?
I did. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was in Tokyo in December for the premiere with Netflix, and they took us to the Kill Bill restaurant in Tokyo that Quentin
Oh,
went to use as inspiration for the set for the House of Blues. And you walk in, and oh god, it's so shameless. They have a gift shop there, and they sell Blu-rays of Kill Bill.
oh, no kidding. That's
And
amazing.
yeah, you walk in, and obviously how the setup is House of Blues. You go upstairs, and it kind of goes around the whole. Like you look down
Yeah.
on the bottom part where the crazy 88 scene happened. Yeah, it was cool. Apparently, Quentin went there one time when he was doing pre-production for Volume One and said, "I like
Mm.
this. I want this to be the crazy 88 scene."
Mm.
But that's amazing, man. I love that. And going to Halloween 2018, like you said, it was one of those things. Well, Chris, why don't you do it? The gentleman you worked with, who was playing the other officer, was he the police? He was an actual officer, wasn't he?
He was. Yeah, he's a real cop. He was a detective, and he was a consultant on the movie. He was a detective in South Carolina. We shot that in South Carolina, right? I have to remember all this stuff. I'm getting old, buddy. And his name's Charlie, and he's a great guy. He's awesome. I love Charlie, and I'm still in touch with him to this day from time to time. But yeah, he was a real cop and really good. Like he did his notes. Like he had all these acting notes that he did for himself. He had all these notes, and that scene that we did together was all made up. It was all improvised. David was just like, just talk about something. I don't care what it is, food, whatever. And so that's why it ended up being about food. And a lot of people hate that scene because there's too much comedy in a Halloween movie or whatever like that. But I thought it was cute and funny and fun and a little bit of levity,
That's the word,
you know.
levity. It kind of breaks that tension for a bit and lets the audience relax and puts them in that false sense of security. And then
Yeah.
when things go down, when you and Charlie see the abandoned car, I think that's great. But I also just love that little beat when Charlie shines the light on your brownie and you're looking and you're so proud of yourself and you're like,
So proud.
I made that myself. It's like a guy holding up a fish that he's caught, and it's just
Right. Well, we had a phone meeting one time. I was in the middle of the build of the movie, and David called and he goes, "Hey," he goes, "you want to be in the movie?" And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, I want you to play this cop." And I go, "I don't do that anymore. I gave up acting. I realized that I sucked at it and I need to stop doing it." And he said, "No, you got to do it." I said, I don't want to do it. And he says, come on, we'll cut your head off and carve it into a pumpkin. And I was like, oh shit, okay, let's do it. So that's why I did it, because I wanted to have my head carved into a pumpkin, which
I mean, it's
which
such
I
a
have,
good
which is
death.
great.
And I did a custom collectible on that because I'm like, that is so cool. I couldn't get my hands on the Tots life size one, and I had the NECA one lying around. I'm like, it's a little one, but it'll make for a good
Yeah.
project.
No, I saw that video. It's a good one. You did a good job on
Thank you, man. Did
that.
did you have to do like likeness rights with NECA, or like how did that work?
No,
Because you're so carved, it doesn't matter who
it
it is.
doesn't matter. No, they just I'm an accessory now. My head is an accessory for
I love
NECA,
that.
which I
Not many
love.
people can say, I've built penguins for Batman, I've built a crocodile, I've built Michael Myers, I have acted in a Tarantino movie, and I'm also an action figure. Like,
That's true.
that's just the man of many talents. So, being a big Freddy fan, and there's a lot of talk at the moment with the Elm Street franchise, going back to the Craven estate, and people they're taking pictures, people are pitching ideas, and if it ever comes to fruition, who knows? If you
Mhm.
had the chance to tackle the Freddy makeup, because I always have like I don't know if you have it. There are certain characters where you like they did it that way. This is how I would do it, and I think the
Mhm.
biggest draw card with Robert it was Robert, but the makeup was done so well by whether it be David Miller, Kevin Yeager, and then Howard Berger helped a lot.
Mhm.
I think they took advantage of Robert's face and didn't
Mhm.
want the makeup looking too thick. And unfortunately, and it's I think with Jackie O'Haley, they kind of lost that a bit, that performance.
Mhm.
How would you,
Mhm.
if you had the chance to take on Freddy, how would you tackle the makeup? And aesthetically, what would you go
Mhm.
for?
Mm. That's a good question. I would love to tackle that makeup.
Mm,
I've been asked that before. I've been asked, other people have asked me if they offered me Nightmare on Elm Street, would I do it? And I absolutely would do it 100% because it's part of my, I just love Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, who doesn't,
mm.
and to have that opportunity, I mean, would be amazing. I would love a shot at it. That's a good question. I really like the Jackie Earl Haley makeup. I think it's really good. I think it's realistic
Mhm.
and cool and disturbing looking. I guess I'm in the minority. I don't know. I really like it. I think it's good. I do see your point in that you kind of lose something character wise, because I think maybe they did take away too much of Jackie's features. Like
Yeah.
they took too much away from him to let him act through it. Although a big part of that is the way it was shot. I don't think it was
Mm.
shot as good as it could have been shot. I think they obscured him a little too much. I thought we needed to see a lot more of it, to be honest with you. I think people would have been happier if we saw more of it, and let Jackie Earl Haley, who's an amazing actor, really emote through that makeup.
Mm.
My favorite Freddy makeup, I would say Kevin Yeager. Part two is my favorite Freddy makeup. That's my
Yeah.
favorite. I think it's fantastic. How would I approach it? I guess it depends on who is playing Freddy. It all
Mm.
depends on the guy who's playing it and the context of the story. I really am a guy who works within the context of what is the story we're trying to tell here, and what is that story, and who is that actor, and what do we do to make sure that we don't lose that actor. I mean, it's got to be a great character actor to play Freddy Krueger. I mean, because it's not going to be Robert.
No,
It's just not.
no.
He's not going to do it. So everyone has to get on board with whoever it's going to be. First of all,
Yes.
the story has to be great, and the context of that makeup is going to be told again by the actor in the story. I don't know. I would. It's hard for me to answer that question without having read a script and see an actor's face.
Yep.
That's the only way that I could say I'd approach it. There's a fine line with Freddy Krueger between realistic burn and fantasy burn. You know, the original Freddy Krueger was all very fantasy like. It wasn't really realistic.
Hmm.
It was kind of had elements to it, but it was more of a character makeup and a fantasy makeup. What do
Yeah.
fans want to see? I mean, you're a fan of Nightmare on Elm Street. If they do a new one, what do you want to see? Do you want to see the fantasy Freddy Krueger, or do you want to see a realistic burn makeup? Because I don't think people want to see. It's kind of like going back to the Michael Myers mask thing. If you
Hmm.
do the original mask the way it's intended, the way it is right now, it's going to be laughable.
Yeah.
If you do a realistic burn makeup on an actor, is it going to work? Because then you're starting to get into the world of, oh, are we saying burn people are hideous villains and things like, you have that whole thing to get involved with. And is it going to work? There's a fantasy element to Nightmare on Elm Street that you need to maintain.
Yeah.
Does that make
I
sense?
Yeah, oh, 100%. I love how methodical you are, and it's not a straight answer, which I respect. It's like, well, what's the context? What's the story? Who's the actor? And I
Yeah.
think that's akin to your work speaks for itself with that. You take the time with the details, the story. You're very involved with the story, the script. I always had it in my head, and I do see where you're coming from with David Miller's makeup. It's a great makeup.
Mm-hmm.
It lends itself
Yeah.
to being very fantasy because that's not exactly what happens to the skin when you're burnt. It's Jackie L. Haley's makeup. You know,
Right.
the neck tightens, things fuse, ears fuse, the nose is gone, stuff like that. And it was like your concept makeup for Michael Myers when he's burnt, and part of the lips missing, and people were like, well, that doesn't look right. You're like, no, that's what happens to the body when you are burnt to a certain degree. You lose features. I
Right.
had always pitched it in my head if they did a direct sequel to the first Elm Street to take David Miller's makeup and have Freddy, because it's been such a jump in time, more decrepit, rotting pieces falling off and seeing anatomy, teeth showing through. Because originally Wes wanted teeth showing through, and David was like, it'll look too hokey if we paste teeth on the side. And
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have tracker dots back then like they did with Aaron Eckhart in The Dark Knight and Jackie as well
Right.
in the remake.
Right.
I would, yeah, and you're right. Kevin Yeager's makeup is so thin but so effective in
Mm-hmm.
Nightmare 2, making him look like the male witch, the sunken eyes. He looks fresh and raw, and I
Yeah.
love all that. But I would definitely take David's makeup, possibly a hybrid with Kevin's, and rot it, like
Right.
bits falling off. That's how I would
Right.
tackle it. But it's a hard one, man. And like you said, there's so many elements that go into it story wise. Who's
Yeah.
cast? What particular facial features can you as an artist take advantage of with the actor?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they took advantage of Robert's beady eyes and his grin, like his teeth are clenched.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
It also has a
again,
lot to do with, his silhouette, the way he carried himself, the way his, the glove weighed down one side of his body. He hunched a certain way. There are so many elements to take into consideration when it comes to that character. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't do it at all if it were up to me. I don't think you should touch Nightmare on Elm Street anymore.
yeah,
Just let it
I
go,
agree. I
leave it
agree.
alone. But if you're gonna do it, then you better get a great character actor. You better get make sure that makeup works within the context of that actor and that story. What's the story?
Mm,
Is he what's the story? I don't know what that story is. I mean that all has everything to do with it.
yeah, I
Hard
agree.
question.
And last question, if there's anyone out there, watching this who has aspirations of becoming an effects artist or just involved in that industry, what advice would you give them? Because let's not beat around the bush. Like being an artist, we have our brooding moments, we have our we're very hard on ourselves, and
Yeah.
sometimes some artists need that push to do what they want to do without fear of being judged. Going back to what you were saying, when we were kids growing up, we kind of shunned away from expressing how we really were as, punk rockers. We were into the twisted stuff that wasn't mainstream. what advice would you give to someone who wanted to follow in, say, your footsteps or any other artist's footsteps? What leap do they have to make? What advice could you
Mm,
give them?
mm. That's a good question. I get asked that a lot, and and the answer changes all the time. I, you, I would say make mistakes. You know, going back off our conversation earlier, make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to take chances. Don't be afraid to express yourself and be you. I think my biggest advice is people. I'm finding that a lot of artists don't have a really great working knowledge of cinema
Mhm.
these days. They rely too much on recent cinema and not past cinema and things that have come before them, artists that have come before them, filmmakers that have come before them. Even if you're going to be a makeup effects artist, have a working knowledge of cinema, all genres, everything, you know, from The Godfather to The Sorcerer to Sunset Boulevard to, you know, just really have, you have to really love movies and storytelling. I think you
Mm.
have to get good at storytelling. You have to be a fan. Be a fan of what you're doing. Be a fan of the stories you're telling and get involved and be a fan of yourself. You have to really be a fan of yourself and be confident and be okay with making mistakes and be look, I've failed. There are people that would say I've failed at a lot of stuff that are is in movies in front of millions of people, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But I did what I approached it as a fan and within the context of the story that I'm trying to tell. And I think that's important. Practice a lot. Just constantly be doing something, constantly be sculpting or painting, or even if it's little things, even if you're painting your own hand to look like something, you know, whatever it is, just constantly be trying to get better and hone your skills and make mistakes on yourself, make mistakes on other people, and reach out to other people and talk to other artists. Is any of this making sense? I'm sorry, I'm a little
No,
all over the
crystal
place,
clear.
but
It's spot on, man. Like just throw clay at something and just do
yeah,
something. Like keep flexing
yeah,
that muscle.
yeah.
Um,
The
well,
stronger you get, you know, the better. Yeah.
Chris, it's been an absolute honor, and I can't thank you enough for your time. And we speak here and there now and then, and obviously when I met you in 2017, just thank you for being you, being humble, but also being very inspiring. Now, obviously, you've got the podcast, The Thing with Two Heads, with the great Sean Clark.
Yes.
Where else can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at C Nelson Effects. That's about it.
Love it.
I'm trying to. I stay pretty quiet. I'm pretty private guy. But yeah, hit me up on C Nelson Effects on Instagram. You can check out the Thing with Two Heads with Sean. I'm sure we'll have another podcast coming out soon. We're both busy guys, so we do it when we can. But thank you for having me so much here. I really appreciate it. I enjoy your work and I like your channel and keep it up and I wish you the best. But thank you for having me. I'm honored. Thank you.
No, it's an absolute honor, man. And again, just yeah, thank you for your time. Like you said, you're a busy guy, but this has been very cathartic for me as an artist. So I really do just appreciate the time. So thank you, man.
You got it, buddy.